Amara Walker clutched her purse as she stepped into the grand ballroom of the Langston estate in Buckhead, feeling completely out of place among the city's elite. The chandeliers glittered above, their golden light spreading across polished marble floors where gowns worth fortunes floated past, and tuxedos gleamed under the glow. She tugged at her simple black dress, the nicest thing she owned, but still painfully plain beside the couture. Her best friend Tasha Brooks leaned close and whispered with excitement that this was her chance to network, to meet people who might help her design business grow, but Amara shook her head and muttered that she didn't belong here, that these people spent on one dinner what she made in a month. Tasha dismissed her doubts, told her she was just as good as anyone in the room, pressed a glass of sparkling water into her hand, and disappeared into the crowd, leaving Amara alone on the edge of the party, trying to distract herself. Amara focused on the mansion's craftsmanship, her designer's eye tracing the ornate cornices and carved molding. That was when she felt it, an intensity that made her skin prickle. She turned and met the unyielding gaze of a man across the ballroom, tall, commanding, dark-skinned, and devastatingly handsome in a perfectly tailored tuxedo. While glamorous women surrounded him, vying desperately for his attention, his eyes never left hers. A whisper nearby told her who he was. Malik Pierce, the billionaire whose tech empire had made him untouchable and every woman's target tonight. Heat rushed to her cheeks as she looked away, but when she glanced back he was still watching, and then he broke from the circle of admirers and walked directly toward her, the crowd parting, the room quieting in his wake. "You look like you're studying the architecture instead of enjoying the party," he said in a deep, smooth voice when he reached her. Amara swallowed hard and admitted she was, explaining that the craftsmanship was remarkable. Surprised, he asked what made her notice such details, and she told him she was an interior designer, or at least trying to be. Gathering courage, she offered her hand and introduced herself. His hand engulfed hers, firm and warm, as he introduced himself in return. When she asked lightly what brought him to the gala, he smiled with a spark of pride and told her it was his gala, that he had bought the Langston estate the month before and was celebrating its restoration. Mortified, Amara apologized, explaining that her friend had dragged her along, but he only held her gaze and told her he was glad she was there, then offered her his arm and asked if she would walk with him in the gardens. Against her instincts but unable to resist the pull she felt, Amara agreed. They walked through moonlit paths among flowering shrubs, silence stretching comfortably until Malik said she was different from the rest. She tried to laugh it off, saying she wasn't rich or powerful, but he shook his head and told her she was transparent, unlike the others he could read from a mile away, that she was a mystery. She insisted she was ordinary, just someone trying to design spaces for people who couldn't afford celebrity decorators. He stopped, turned to her and told her firmly there was nothing ordinary about her. Her heart pounded under the weight of his eyes and the warmth of his cologne when he suddenly said he had a proposition. Bracing herself, she started to object, but his words stunned her into silence. "Marry me." She blinked, certain she misheard, but he repeated it unflinching, explaining that he needed a wife who wasn't after his money or status, someone real, someone with passion of her own, and that he knew instantly she was the one. Amara tried to protest that they had just met and that it was insane, but he cut her off, saying he had built an empire by knowing opportunities the moment he saw them. When she found her voice enough to ask what she would gain from such an arrangement, he answered with precision: financial security, connections for her business, and then, softer and more dangerous, his undivided devotion. Logic screamed at her to walk away, but as she looked into his eyes, she saw not just power and calculation, but a raw loneliness that echoed her own. Something inside her shifted, and before she could stop herself, she whispered yes. 3 weeks later, Amara was the headline of every paper: tech billionaire Malik Pierce to wed unknown designer. In the bridal suite of the Langston estate, Tasha adjusted pearl pins in her hair and warned her it wasn't too late, that this was madness. But Amara looked at her reflection in the silken lace gown worth more than her apartment, and said maybe madness was what she needed, because playing it safe had never gotten her anywhere. Tasha fretted that Malik was a calculating man, and this wasn't a love story but a business deal. But Amara only smiled faintly, feeling a thrill she couldn't deny. The ballroom where they had first met was now transformed into a paradise of white roses and cascading greenery. 300 guests stood as the doors opened, but Amara saw only Malik waiting at the altar, tall, regal, impossibly magnetic. His whispered words as she reached him, "You're breathtaking," Mom, burned in her chest. Their vows rang out, his promising respect, honor, and devotion, hers promising partnership in a home built with love. When the officiant declared them husband and wife, Malik cupped her face and kissed her, not politely but with searing hunger, a kiss that silenced the room before applause erupted. Breathless, dazed, Amara clung to him. "That wasn't in the contract," she whispered. "Consider it a bonus clause," he murmured with a smile, holding her firmly as they turned to face the cheering crowd as husband and wife. The reception at the Langston estate had been a blur of champagne, toasts, and careful conversation. Amara found herself constantly aware of Malik's hand at the small of her back, guiding her through clusters of his business associates and powerful friends. Whenever they were separated by the press of guests, his eyes found hers across the room, grounding her with an intensity that made her stomach flutter. During their first dance as photographers circled, she teased that he was playing the part of devoted groom too convincingly, and he whispered back, "Who says I'm playing? You're breathtaking, Amara, and now you're mine." His words carried a possessive edge that sent a thrill through her, though she tried to remind him with a smile that their agreement was only for a year. His reply, "A lot can happen in a year," echoed in her mind long after the music ended. By the time the towering cake had been cut and the speeches wound down, she was exhausted and exhilarated in equal measure. When Malik leaned close and asked if she was ready to leave, the low promise in his tone made her pulse quicken. She nodded, asking where they were going, and his lips brushed her ear as he answered, "My private island in the Bahamas. Just you, me, and miles of secluded beach." Heat flared in her belly at his next words. He had been thinking about getting her out of that dress. Since the moment he first saw her in it, they slipped away from the ballroom and crossed the estate lawn to where a sleek helicopter waited. The blades sliced the night as they lifted off, carrying them away from Atlanta's glittering skyline. Inside, Amara kicked off her heels with relief and curled her legs beneath her on the leather seat. Malik loosened his bow tie with one hand while handing her water with the other. Their fingers brushed, and even that fleeting contact sent a ripple of awareness through her. "You'll get used to this world," he said when she murmured that helicopters and private jets didn't feel real. "It's very real, and now it's ours." When they touched down on a private airstrip, a Gulfstream jet stood ready, stairs already lowered. Minutes later, they were airborne again, the dark Atlantic stretching endless below. At cruising altitude, Malik disappeared briefly into the rear cabin and returned with a small box. He pressed it into her hands, calling it a wedding gift. Inside lay a delicate platinum necklace with a teardrop diamond pendant. "It's beautiful," she breathed, but insisted he didn't need to give her anything. "I wanted to," he replied, stepping behind her to fasten it around her neck, his fingers lingering at her skin, his breath warm against her shoulder. "Perfect. Like it was made for you." She turned toward him, whispering thanks, but his gaze dropped to her lips. "You don't need to thank me. This arrangement benefits you, but it benefits me more than you know." Then his mouth covered hers in a kiss that stole her breath, slow and deep. Nothing like the fiery claim at the wedding, but more dangerous for the tenderness it carried. His hands framed her face, his tongue teasing until she opened for him with a soft sound of surrender. She clutched at his shirt, dizzy, her heart racing when he finally pulled back. "We've got 4 hours until we land," he said, his voice low and rough. "We should get some rest." When she blinked in surprise, he smiled. "When I make love to you for the first time, Amara, it won't be in an airplane. I want you beneath me with moonlight spilling over your skin and all the time in the world. I plan to be thorough." His words left her trembling, heat rushing through her body, but true to his word, he restrained himself for the remainder of the flight, though she often caught his hungry eyes on her. By the time they transferred to a waiting speedboat, the tension between them had become almost unbearable. As dawn broke, the island rose on the horizon like a green jewel set in turquoise water. White sand curved around a sleek modern villa nestled among palms, its glass walls catching the morning light. "Welcome to Azure Cay," Malik said as the boat slid to the dock. "Our home for the next 2 weeks." Amara gasped at the beauty of it, whispering that it was paradise. "It's just the beginning," he promised, helping her onto the dock. Staff greeted them briefly, a housekeeper, a chef, a caretaker, then vanished to their own quarters, leaving the newlyweds completely alone. Malik led her through the villa, All glass and polished wood, every room opening to stunning views of sea and sky. The master suite boasted an infinity pool that seemed to spill into the ocean itself. "Hungry?" he asked as they stood in the vast living room. She shook her head, her awareness fixed solely on him, her body already alive with need. "Good," he murmured, and in one swift movement he closed the distance between them, his mouth claiming hers with the passion that had been building since the night of the gala. She melted into him, arms winding around his neck as his hands explored the curves of her body through her travel dress. "I've thought of this moment since I first saw you," he whispered against her throat, pressing hot kisses along her collarbone. "You stood alone in that black dress like you belonged in another world." "Your world," she gasped as his teeth grazed her skin. "Our world," he corrected, slowly lowering the zipper of her dress. "And I intend to make you its queen." The dress slipped to the floor, leaving her in lace and the new diamond pendant gleaming at her chest. His eyes darkened as they roamed over her. "Even more beautiful than I imagined," he said thickly. Self-consciousness flared, but the raw hunger in his gaze banished it. Emboldened, Amara reached for the buttons of his shirt, her hands trembling as she revealed the planes of his chest and stomach, each muscle sculpted and powerful. He stood still, letting her undress him, his eyes never leaving hers. When they were both down to almost nothing, he swept her into his arms and carried her to the master suite, laying her on the bed with surprising gentleness before stripping away the last barriers. Naked, he was magnificent, all lean muscle and coiled strength, and her anticipation made her body tremble. His hands skimmed her thighs and he observed softly, "You're nervous." She admitted she was, that it had been a while, and his expression softened. "We have all day," he promised, lowering himself beside her. "I want to learn every inch of you, what makes you sigh, what makes you gasp, what makes you scream my name." What followed was patience and pleasure entwined. Malik took his time, worshipping her body with reverence, his mouth and hands coaxing waves of sensation that built and retreated until she was begging. When he finally entered her, she cried out, overwhelmed by the exquisite fullness, her body arching into his. He held her gaze, his voice rough as he told her it was no longer about an arrangement, that he needed her to want him for real. She whispered that she did, that she had wanted him since that first night. Relief and triumph flashed in his eyes as he moved with her, each stroke drawing her higher until she shattered beneath him, her cries muffled by his kiss as he followed her into release. Afterwards, she lay with her head on his chest, listening to his steady heartbeat while his hand stroked her back. He teased that she couldn't possibly think this was only business anymore, and she laughed weakly, saying if this was how he handled business, she was surprised he had time to run an empire. His arms tightened, his voice dropping to a possessive growl as he told her it was exclusive, that only she would ever have this part of him. Something warm bloomed in her chest, dangerous but irresistible, as he rolled her beneath him again with eyes full of renewed hunger. Over the days that followed, they fell into a rhythm that blurred passion and discovery. They made love beneath the stars on the beach, in the infinity pool at sunset, even against the kitchen counter when a midnight snack turned into something else entirely. But it wasn't only physical. They talked. He confessed his childhood had been lonely, raised by parents who valued achievement over affection. She spoke of growing up with her single mother, Gloria, in Beaufort, watching her work 3 jobs to keep them afloat. He connected the dots, realizing she designed spaces now to create beauty she never had as a child, and she was startled that he understood her better than anyone else ever had. He pulled her close and told her he paid attention. By the end of the first week on the island, Amara had to admit the truth she had been resisting. What began as a contractual marriage was already becoming something much more complicated and far more real. The spell of Azure K broke the moment they returned to Atlanta. Malik's penthouse atop Pierce Tower was everything the island villa was not. Steel, glass, and sleek minimalism, more like a showroom than a home. The elevator opened directly into a vast foyer where the city stretched out in glittering lights through floor-to-ceiling windows. "Home sweet home," Malik said as he stepped inside, his voice carrying the pride of ownership. Amara followed, her eyes scanning the space. It was undeniably impressive, every piece of furniture curated for status, but the pristine white sofas and sterile walls left her chilled. It lacked warmth, lacked life. Your things have been unpacked in the master suite, Malik said, glancing at his phone. Feel free to make any changes to the decor. This is your home now, too. Her fingers brushed a sofa that looked untouched. Challenge accepted, she said lightly. His brow arched. Should I be worried? Very. No one should live in a place this perfect. It needs soul. I trust your professional judgment, he said with a faint smile, leaning down to kiss her forehead. I've got meetings the rest of the day, but dinner tonight. Heirloom on Peachtree. My assistant reserved a table. The elevator closed behind him, and Amara found herself alone in the towering penthouse, its silence echoing too loudly after weeks of ocean waves and Malik's constant attention. For the first time, she realized how drastically different her life had become. She was a wife, yes, but also married to a man who ran an empire that consumed most of his time. Over the next weeks, they settled into a rhythm. Malik's days stretched late into the night with endless board meetings and business deals, while Amara divided her time between transforming the cold penthouse into a home and launching her design business. Being Mrs. Pierce gave her unprecedented access. Suddenly, potential clients returned calls, and projects that once felt out of reach landed in her lap. Still, she refused to rely only on his name. She worked tirelessly to prove she could stand on her own. But if the days belonged to Malik's empire and her fledgling career, the nights belonged entirely to them. No matter how long his hours, he always came home. They ate together, shared stories about their days, and later surrendered to the passion that refused to cool. One evening, about a month after they had returned, Malik leaned back on the sectional she had chosen, surveying the room with approval. Warm textiles softened the edges, curated art brightened the walls, and the sterile perfection had given way to comfort. You've worked miracles, he said, his arm sliding around her as she curled against him. It just needed warmth, she replied, teasing softly. Like you. His eyebrow lifted. Are you calling me cold, Mrs. Pierce? I'm saying you've been taught to present a certain image, she answered, tracing the sharp line of his jaw with her finger. But there's fire underneath. His hand caught hers, bringing it to his lips. His gaze darkened. Only you get to see that fire. Her breath caught, her heart thundering under the weight of his eyes. What began as a business arrangement was no longer simple. She was falling for him, for the man beneath the billionaire armor, the man who held her when she was tired, who remembered every detail she shared, who made her laugh in stolen moments. It scared her, because nothing in their contract had prepared her for this. Weeks later, Amara woke one morning with a wave of dizziness and nausea so strong she barely reached the bathroom in time. Gripping the counter, she convinced herself it was food poisoning, but the same thing happened the next morning and the one after that. A suspicion formed that she tried to ignore, until finally she slipped into a pharmacy and returned with a small white bag hidden in her purse. Minutes later, she sat on the edge of the bathtub, staring at the test trembling in her hand. 2 pink lines, positive. Her chest tightened. This wasn't supposed to happen, she whispered to the empty room. Their arrangement had been about stability, appearances, passion, but not children. There had been no talk of a family, no clause in the contract for this. Her mind spun with questions. Would Malik be furious? Would he think she had trapped him? Would he want out? All day anxiety gnawed at her. When she heard his key in the door that evening, she had worked herself into a knot of dread. He walked in carrying bags of Italian takeout, smiling as he called that he had brought her favorite. She tried to play it casual, but he studied her face closely. Something's wrong, he said quietly, setting the bags aside. Tell me, she shook her head. It's nothing. He tipped his head, his eyes narrowing. You're a terrible liar, Amara, your eyebrow twitches. Despite her nerves, a laugh escaped. It does not. Yes, it does, he said, hands cupping her face gently. Now tell me. Her voice shook. I need to tell you something important, but I don't know how you'll react. Concern flickered across his face. Are you unhappy? Is it something I did? No, nothing like that, but our arrangement just got more complicated. His brows furrowed. How? She bit her lip, then forced the words out. I'm pregnant. Silence hung between them, the air thick. His hands dropped, his expression unreadable. Finally, his voice came, tightly controlled. Are you sure? She nodded. I took a test this morning. Positive, I know this wasn't part of the deal. I was on birth control, but nothing is 100%, he finished, turning away, bracing his hands on the counter. His back was rigid. How far along? Based on timing, it happened on the island. He nodded slowly, still facing away. The seconds stretched painfully until she whispered, "If this changes things, I understand." "If you want to renegotiate," he spun, his expression fierce. "Renegotiate? You think I would renegotiate because you're carrying my child?" Her eyes stung with tears. "I didn't know what you'd want. We never even talked about children. Maybe you don't want to be a father." Something raw broke through his controlled mask. "I never thought I would be," he admitted, voice rough. "My father was a disaster. But now," his eyes softened as he closed the distance and pulled her into his arms. "Now I'm terrified, but not because I don't want this." Her breath hitched. "You're not upset?" "Upset?" His lips curved into a slow smile. "You're carrying my child, Amara, our child. How could I ever be upset about that?" His hand slid to her still flat stomach, his eyes full of wonder. Relief washed through her in a dizzying rush, and for the first time that day she allowed herself to hope. "We're having a baby," he said firmly, pulling her closer, "and we're staying married far longer than 1 year." The joy of their new reality lasted only a few days before the outside world intruded. One morning, as Amara stepped out of her OB's office with Malik by her side, the sound of shutters exploded like gunfire. Paparazzi had swarmed the sidewalk, lenses trained on her face, on Malik's protective hand resting over her stomach. "Mrs. Pierce, how far along are you? Amara, did you plan this pregnancy to secure your position? Malik, are you confirming an heir to the Pierce fortune?" The barrage was relentless. Amara froze, blinded by flashing bulbs, panic clawing at her chest. Malik's arm locked firmly around her, guiding her to the waiting car with an authority that silenced nothing but steadied her. Once inside, with tinted windows shielding them, she exhaled shakily. "This is exactly what I feared," she whispered. "They're going to turn everything into a scandal." His jaw was hard, his eyes dark with fury. "Then we take control of the story before they do. I won't let them define us." That evening, he called in his most trusted media strategist. Together, they laid out a plan that was as bold as it was risky. Invite the press into their home, show them a curated version of their marriage, make the narrative their own. Amara's instinct was to retreat, to hide, but Malik's determination was unshakable. "The only way forward is through. If they see us, see our reality, they can't twist it." 2 days later, cameras entered the Pierce penthouse. The sterile showroom she had first stepped into was now a warm, elegant space filled with her touches, and Malik insisted that was intentional. "Show them what you've built here," he told her, lacing his fingers with hers as they sat side by side on the sofa. "Show them us." The interview played out like a scene from a carefully written script, but every word carried truth. Malik spoke of his pride in his wife's design business, how she had transformed not only his home but his life. Amara spoke with quiet honesty about her upbringing in Beaufort, about being raised by her mother Gloria, and about how unexpected love had come from an arrangement neither of them imagined would turn real. When the reporter finally asked about the baby, Malik didn't hesitate. His arm slid around Amara's shoulders, pulling her close. "Yes, we're expecting. And it wasn't planned, but it's the best surprise of my life." His voice dropped with sincerity. "I never thought I'd want a family. She changed that. She changed me." The segment aired that weekend and spread like wildfire. Overnight, the tone of the coverage shifted. The headlines no longer sneered about an opportunistic bride. Instead, they marveled at the unlikely romance. Photos of Malik gazing down at Amara with a tenderness that no strategist could manufacture flooded magazines and blogs. Comments poured in calling them the couple of the year. In the privacy of their bedroom that night, Amara lay against him, her hand resting over her stomach. "You were incredible," she murmured. They believed every word. Malik kissed her hair. They believed because it was true. "I meant every word." His voice grew husky. "I'll protect you, Amara, you and our child. Whatever it takes." Her heart swelled, fear and love colliding inside her. Their world was no longer private, no longer just theirs. But lying in his arms, she felt the certainty that as long as he was beside her, they could face it all. A week after the interview shifted the headlines in their favor, Malik insisted they take a break from Atlanta's relentless attention. When his private jet touched down in South Carolina, Amara's chest tightened with nerves. She hadn't set foot in Beaufort in years, not since she had left with a one-way ticket and a dream of building something better for herself. Now she was returning not only as a wife but as the pregnant bride of a billionaire. The drive through Beaufort's narrow streets and moss-draped oaks stirred a flood of memories. The pastel-colored homes, the small-town shops, the salty tang of the air, it all made her ache with nostalgia and anxiety. She sat in the passenger seat of the SUV Malik had insisted on driving himself, his hand resting lightly on her thigh as he guided them past streets that felt unchanged by time. "You're quiet," he said softly. "Just thinking about how different everything is now. The last time I was here I was broke, barely able to buy that ticket out. Now, this." She gestured to the diamond on her hand, the baby growing inside her and the man behind the wheel. His expression softened. "Are you happy?" She placed her hand over his. "Happier than I ever imagined possible." When they pulled into the driveway of the modest bungalow with its weathered shutters and overflowing garden, Amara's heart lodged in her throat. Before Malik could even shut off the engine, the front door swung open and Gloria Walker hurried down the steps, her arms spread wide. "There's my girl," she called, her voice already thick with emotion. Amara leapt into her mother's embrace, tears stinging her eyes. "I've missed you so much, Mama." Gloria held her tightly, then pulled back to study her face. "Marriage looks good on you. You're glowing." Amara laughed nervously and pressed a hand to her stomach. "That might be for another reason." Her mother's eyes widened. "Amara Walker, are you telling me you're making me a grandmother?" Tears spilled as Amara nodded, and Gloria crushed her in another hug. Over her shoulder, Malik lingered by the car, looking slightly out of place in his tailored casual clothes, but standing tall. Amara pulled her mother back enough to say, "Mama, I'd like you to meet my husband, Malik Pierce." Gloria turned toward him, her sharp eyes appraising him in a single sweep. Malik stepped forward with the same confidence he wore in boardrooms, extending his hand with a warm smile. "Mrs. Walker, it's a pleasure. Amara speaks of you constantly." Instead of taking his hand, Gloria pulled him into a hug. "We're family now. Call me Gloria." For a moment, Malik froze, clearly unused to such unguarded warmth. Then slowly he returned the hug. "Thank you, Gloria." Inside, the house smelled of collard greens and cornbread, and Malik surprised Amara by fitting himself easily into the rhythm of her mother's world. He admired the photos lining the mantel, asked questions about her late father, and even rolled up his sleeves when Gloria asked him to help set the table. Over dinner, he answered her mother's blunt questions with honesty that left Amara blinking in surprise. He didn't hide behind corporate polish. He spoke like a man determined to earn her family's trust. Later, while Amara washed dishes beside her mother, Gloria lowered her voice. "He's not what I expected." Amara braced herself. "What did you expect?" Gloria's eyes softened. "Someone too rich to care about the little things. But that man is in my kitchen drying plates like he's done it all his life. And the way he looks at you, baby girl, that's not business. That's love." Amara's chest tightened, a mixture of hope and fear swelling inside her. When Malik drove them back to their hotel that night, he reached over and threaded his fingers through hers. "Your mom's something else," he said with a faint smile. "She liked you," Amara teased. He chuckled, shaking his head. "I liked her too." Then his voice grew quiet, almost reverent. "Thank you for sharing this part of your world with me." As Amara leaned her head against his shoulder, she realized that the lines between their arrangement and their marriage had blurred almost completely. He wasn't just the man who had proposed an outrageous deal. He was the man who had stood in her mother's kitchen, sleeves rolled up, laughing like he belonged there, and for the first time she wondered if maybe he did. The trip to Beaufort had changed something between them. When they returned to Atlanta, Amara felt the weight of Malik's hand in hers differently, like a silent vow that they weren't just surviving the storm of media and contracts anymore. They were building something real. One Saturday morning, Malik woke her with a quiet kiss and told her to get dressed. No explanation, just a mischievous gleam in his eyes. An hour later, their SUV pulled into a secluded driveway overlooking Lake Oconee. Spread before them was a sprawling estate of rolling green lawns, towering pines, and a wide blue lake shimmering in the distance. At the edge of the property stood a beautiful unfinished house with a broad porch and windows that drank in the view. Amara blinked in disbelief. "What is this?" "Our future," Malik said simply. "I bought the land years ago but never touched it. I was waiting for a reason. Now I have one." He turned to her, his eyes fierce. This city penthouse isn't enough for us, Amara. Not for our family. This will be our sanctuary. A place for our child to grow up, a place for you to feel rooted. A place for us to breathe. Her throat tightened. Malik, it's beautiful. But it's too much. Nothing for you is too much, he replied, sliding his hand over her still flat stomach. And you'll design it. Every room, every detail. This will be your canvas. Tears blurred her vision as she nodded, struck by the trust and devotion behind the gift. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of plans. Between doctor's appointments, interviews, and design consultations, Amara poured herself into transforming the Lake Oconee house into a home filled with warmth, light, and love. Malik joined her whenever he could, walking the property with her, listening to her ideas, always insisting on touches that reflected her taste. One afternoon, as they strolled through the bare-bones frame of what would be the nursery, Amara caught Malik leaning against the doorway, watching her sketch ideas on her tablet. His gaze wasn't calculating or distant, it was tender, reverent, as though he couldn't believe she was real. "What?" she asked, blushing under his scrutiny. "You," he said simply. "You make everything brighter. I've built empires, Amara, but this, watching you build our home, it feels more important than anything I've ever done." Her heart swelled so much it almost hurt. At the same time, Malik wanted her dreams to flourish outside their family. One evening after dinner at Heirloom on Peachtree, he slid a folder across the table. Inside was a proposal from the Auburn Grand Hotel, one of Atlanta's most historic properties in the Sweet Auburn district, seeking a full redesign of its flagship ballroom. "They reached out to me, of course," Malik explained, "but I told them there was only one designer I trusted." Amara stared at him, her eyes wide. "You're giving me the Auburn Grand? I'm giving you the opportunity. The name is yours to make. You'll lead the project, your vision, your stamp. The city will finally see what I already know, that you're extraordinary." Her hands trembled as she touched the proposal. "Malik, this is huge. It could make my career." "It will," he said firmly. "And you'll still have me at every doctor's appointment, every late-night craving, every step of this pregnancy. You don't have to choose between family and career. With me, you'll have both." That night, lying in bed, Amara curled into him with tears slipping down her cheeks. "I don't know how to thank you," she whispered. He kissed her forehead. "Don't thank me. Just promise me that when people ask how you did it, you'll tell them you never let anyone make you feel small. You're not just my wife, Amara. You're a force, and the world deserves to see it." With his arms wrapped around her and the future stretching out before them like the lake outside their window, Amara realized she wasn't just in love, she was becoming whole. The months of pregnancy passed in a blur of anticipation and preparation. The Lake Oconee house slowly came alive under Amara's designs, each room reflecting warmth and intention, while the penthouse in Midtown Atlanta remained their base until the baby's arrival. Malik never missed a doctor's appointment, always at her side during ultrasounds, his large hand enveloping hers when the steady rhythm of their baby's heartbeat filled the room. Each time his eyes softened and he would whisper, "That's ours." As her due date approached, the press speculated endlessly about the Pierce heir, but Malik grew fiercely protective, tightening their circle and keeping paparazzi far from the hospital. When the first contraction gripped Amara in the middle of the night, Malik didn't panic. He simply lifted her into his arms, carried her to the car, and drove with a calm intensity that masked the storm inside him. At the hospital, time bent and stretched into hours of pain and waiting. Malik refused to leave her side, holding her through every contraction, whispering encouragement, wiping sweat from her brow. For all his billions, for all his power, in that room he was simply a man terrified of losing the woman he loved. When the cries finally broke through the silence, Amara collapsed back against the bed, tears streaming down her cheeks. The nurse placed a tiny wailing bundle in her arms and everything stilled. A daughter, perfect, pink, and alive. "Meet your father," Amara whispered, her voice shaking as she handed the baby into Malik's trembling hands. For a moment, he just stared, his composure shattering. His daughter's eyes blinked up at him, and Malik Pierce, the man who built an empire from steel, let tears fall freely down his face. "Olivia Gloria Pierce," he said hoarsely, naming her for Amara's mother, his thumb brushing her impossibly small cheek. "Welcome to the world, princess." Watching him cradle their daughter, Amara knew she would never again doubt his devotion. This was no arrangement. This was forever. The weeks after Olivia's birth were exhausting and beautiful. Malik insisted on taking night shifts, learning how to rock and feed their daughter with the same determination he brought to billion-dollar deals. The sight of him pacing their bedroom shirtless, a tiny baby pressed to his chest, whispering lullabies in a deep rumble, was enough to undo Amara completely. She often lay awake not from the cries of the newborn, but from watching the man she had once thought untouchable turn into the most tender father she had ever imagined. Their marriage, born of a contract, was now held together by love, trust, and the tiny miracle sleeping between them. 1 year later, Malik whisked her away for their anniversary. When the jet landed, Amara gasped to see the turquoise waters of Azure Cay again. The island where everything had begun stretched out before them. But this time they weren't alone. They brought Olivia, now a chubby-cheeked infant who laughed as the salty breeze brushed her face. They spent the days reliving old memories, walking the beaches where they had once confessed their fears, swimming in the infinity pool where they had tangled in laughter and desire. At night, when Olivia slept peacefully in her crib, Malik pulled Amara onto the balcony overlooking the moonlit ocean. 1 year ago, "I asked you for 12 months of your life," he said, his arms circling her waist. "Now I want the rest of it." Amara's throat tightened. "You already have it." He kissed her with the same fierce hunger as their wedding day, but beneath it now was something steadier, deeper, indestructible. The contract had expired, but their love had only just begun. The months after Olivia's birth were filled with sleepless nights, quiet mornings, and stolen moments of love. But amid the chaos, Amara refused to let go of the Auburn Grand project. Some had doubted she would see it through after becoming a mother, but she worked tirelessly, juggling midnight feedings with design sketches and site visits. Malik insisted on a full support team, nannies, assistants, drivers, but Amara set boundaries. She didn't want anyone to say the project belonged to Malik's money. She wanted it to be hers. On opening night, the ballroom shimmered under crystal chandeliers that had been lovingly restored, the gilded moldings glowing beneath a fresh coat of paint. The once faded murals revived with colors that sang of history and pride. The space told a story of Atlanta's resilience and Black excellence, and Amara's fingerprints were in every detail. As she stood at the back of the hall, watching guests sweep in with gasps of awe, Malik appeared at her side, his tuxedo crisp, his presence commanding. "Look at what you've done," he murmured, his eyes sweeping the room before landing on her. "You've taken history and made it breathe again." Tears pricked her eyes. "Do you really think it's enough? That they'll see me as more than your wife?" He cupped her face, tilting her chin up. "They'll see you exactly as you are, the woman who built this. And if they don't, then I'll make them. But tonight, Amara, this is yours. Own it." When the time came for speeches, the hotel board chairman publicly credited her vision for the project's success. The applause that followed was thunderous, and as she stepped up to the podium, Amara caught sight of Malik holding Olivia in the back of the room. Their daughter clapped her tiny hands, giggling while her father's gaze burned with pride. Amara spoke with a steady voice, sharing her journey from Beaufort to Atlanta, from designing modest spaces to bringing life back into one of the city's crown jewels. She ended by dedicating the project to her mother, Gloria, and to every woman who had ever been told her dreams were too small. The next morning, the headlines weren't about Malik Pierce's empire or wealth. They were about his wife. Amara Pierce redefines Atlanta luxury, Auburn Grand restored with vision and soul. For the first time, she wasn't just the billionaire's bride. She was a name in her own right. Later that week, as they walked through the nearly completed Lake Oconee house, Malik pulled her into what would become his study. A sleek mahogany desk had been delivered, but on top of it sat a leather-bound portfolio embossed with her name. "What's this?" she asked, lifting it carefully. "Your firm," he said. "Pierce Interiors. A headquarters downtown, staffed and funded but directed entirely by you. Every contract, every client, every decision yours. I told you the world would see what I already knew. Now they will." Her eyes blurred as she whispered his name. He wrapped his arms around her, lowering his forehead to hers. "You gave me a daughter, Amara. You gave me a home. You gave me something I never thought I'd have. Let me give this to you." Her tears spilled freely, but her voice was steady. "Then I promise I'll make you proud." You already have, he murmured, kissing her until the portfolio slipped from her hands and fell forgotten onto the desk. Time moved quickly, measured not in board meetings or construction deadlines, but in the milestones of a growing child. Olivia's first word, her first steps across the hardwood floor of the Lake Oconee house, the way she toddled through the gardens laughing with her curls bouncing, those were the moments that redefined Malik and Amara's world. The man who once thought he had no place in family life became the father who left early from meetings to catch a preschool recital. The man who built a billion-dollar empire but spent his evenings reading picture books in silly voices just to make his daughter giggle. Amara flourished alongside him, her name now firmly established in Atlanta's design world. Pierce Interiors grew quickly, winning contracts not only for the Auburn Grand but also for new luxury residences and corporate spaces that bore her stamp of warmth and sophistication. She balanced work and motherhood with determination, and Malik made sure she never carried the weight alone. When she had late nights at the office, he was at home making mac and cheese for Olivia. When she traveled for site visits, he cleared his schedule to be the one waiting at the school gates. Their marriage had grown beyond the intoxicating passion of its early days into something deeper, something unshakable. They still burned for each other, still stole nights away on Azure K or private weekends in the penthouse, but there was a new rhythm to their love, one grounded in trust and built on the daily choices to put each other first. On their 5th anniversary, Malik threw a gala at the newly renovated Auburn Grand, this time not for investors or media, but for charity, a fundraiser supporting scholarships for underprivileged design students in Amara's name. The ballroom glittered with hundreds of guests, but for Amara, the highlight wasn't the applause or the coverage in the press. It was watching her husband stand on stage with their daughter perched proudly on his hip as he told the crowd that his wife had taught him the true meaning of legacy. Legacy isn't measured in balance sheets or stock prices, Malik said, his voice carrying across the ballroom. It's measured in the lives we touch, the homes we build, the families we nurture. Amara gave me more than a wife and a daughter. She gave me a future worth living for. The crowd erupted in applause, but Amara's eyes blurred with tears as Malik crossed the stage and placed Olivia in her arms, then kissed her before the cameras. That night, when the lights dimmed and the guests departed, Amara and Malik stood alone in the ballroom where it had all begun, the same hall where he had first shocked her with his outrageous proposal years ago. Now, with their child asleep upstairs and their names etched together in the city's story, it felt like life had come full circle. Do you ever regret it? Amara asked softly, her fingers tracing the lapel of his tuxedo. Regret? Malik's eyes locked onto hers, fierce and tender. The only thing I regret is not finding you sooner. You saved me from a life of emptiness, Amara. You gave me fire, home, family. You gave me everything, she smiled through her tears. And you gave me the world. He drew her close, his lips brushing her ear. Then let's build more of it together. More homes, more love, maybe even more children. Her heart leapt, laughter bubbling from her throat. We'll see about that. But as he kissed her in the center of the ballroom, Amara knew the truth. Their story was only just beginning. And whatever came next, they would face it together, side by side, stronger than ever. Years later, the house at Lake Oconee had become the heart of their world. Its wide porch echoed with the sound of children's laughter, its rooms filled with warmth and love. Olivia, now old enough to race barefoot through the grass, was joined by a baby brother who toddled after her, his chubby legs unsteady, his giggles filling the air. Malik often stood at the edge of the lawn watching them play, his arms folded, a rare softness in his face. He had built skyscrapers and commanded boardrooms, but nothing compared to watching his children chase fireflies under the Georgia twilight. Inside, Amara moved through the house she had once only imagined, every corner a reflection of her design and their shared dreams. Her firm, Pierce Interiors, had expanded into a national name, yet she still made time to sketch ideas at the kitchen table while Malik leaned over her shoulder, pretending to offer opinions but mostly looking for excuses to kiss her neck. One summer evening, after the children had finally been tucked into bed, Amara and Malik sat together on the porch swing overlooking the lake. The water shimmered under the fading light, cicadas hummed in the trees, and the night smelled of honeysuckle. Do you ever think about how it all started? She asked quietly, resting her head against his shoulder. He chuckled, his arm tightening around her. A gala, a crowded ballroom, a man insane enough to propose to a stranger in the garden. And a woman insane enough to say yes, she teased. Not insane, he said, pressing a kiss into her hair. Brave, fate, whatever you want to call it, it brought me you. It brought me this. He gestured toward the house, the lake, the life they had built, her eyes misted. It doesn't feel real sometimes. I went from a girl struggling to make rent to a woman with a family, a career, and a husband who... She trailed off, overcome. Who what? He asked, his voice low. Who loves me more fiercely than I ever thought possible? Malik turned her face toward his gaze as intense as the night they first locked eyes. I told you once I wanted a year. I lied, I wanted forever. And now I have it. Their kiss was slow, tender, certain. The kind of kiss that spoke of promises already kept and promises yet to come. From inside, the faint cry of their youngest stirred the air. But Malik only smiled, rising to lift Amara to her feet. Our kingdom awaits, he murmured. Hand in hand, they walked back into the home that was more than a house. It was their story made solid, a testament to love born out of the most unlikely beginning. And as Amara looked at her husband, her children, and the legacy they were creating, she knew this was not just a chapter. This was their forever.